Lami and Bacon, my brothers, here we are. We are now going to be talking about was the Quran referring to Jerusalem when it spoke about Mecca? And this is going to be part 2 of what Odon said is a 28-part series. Part of that is because he apologizes for talking so slowly. So, we expect maybe. Sorry, guys. We expect to have one more episode. The reason being that we want to give everyone an opportunity to really discuss this, really put out some ideas. And we've got a great panel. I've got J. Corman Kane. We've got Odon Lafontaine, the Odon Lafontaine, and of course, the Mel from Islamic Origins, both legends in the space. People that everyone looked up to, and Mal was one of the early forerunners. So great to have him, and of course Dr. K, who's also busy putting out some great written works and doing some excellent stuff. So thank you guys, and welcome back.
Hello everyone. Very, very pleased to meet the team again, Mel, Lloyd, and JC, and a new one for me, Dr. K, which who I am very pleased to meet. And I think we'll have a very interesting discussion on the Jerusalem thesis.
Yeah, I think you demolished the Quranic claims last week. I mean, just your opening slide on the geographical and physical conditions. I mean, that was so compelling and so convincing.
Yeah, but there's something of an echo here. Do you hear an echo of?
No.
No. It's I'm sorry. I had opened a YouTube window which I had to close because it was very, very strange. No, sorry, guys. So what I wanted to say is that last time we had a short presentation on the physics, the geographical features of Mecca and historical features of Mecca, but it was not the main topic. The main topic was Quranic studies, but those mere historical and geographical issues were evidence enough to completely annihilate the Islamic narrative about Mecca.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the most compelling evidence, the most compelling of all, is the Quranic evidence. Because what I intend to demonstrate is that every mention that the standard Islamic narrative attributes to Mecca in the Quran actually also refer to Jerusalem. And there are huge evidence that no settlement was possible in Mecca. We talked about the water issues, the food issues, and so on. But just imagine that the most ancient evidence that Islam has for Mecca is supposedly the Quranic text, because there is no other evidence before the Quran. The tradition has been written after the Quran. So even for Muslims, their first piece of evidence excuse me, is the Quran. And now imagine that we can prove that the Quran is not about Mecca, but Jerusalem. There is no argument that can stand against this. And this is what we started on the last presentation. I presented a list of the descriptions, this description that the Quran tradition attributes to Mecca. Let me just share my screen and show you the presentation.
All right. Here we go.
You
are showing your
full screen. full screen. This is what we saw last week. The science sources, the contradictory narratives about Mecca. So I won't go back into it. And these were the 15 items I selected, and I did not select this item actually. These are all the references that are supposedly attributed to Mecca, and we investigated the items number 1 to 4, so the Makam Ibrahim, the station of Abraham, and we saw that it could refer to the place, the Mount Moriah, where in the book of Genesis, God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. We looked at the Masjid al-Haram, so the sacred mosque, and we saw that it could very well refer to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. We looked at the many occurrences of the Beit, the house, and also saw that it could also refer to the temple in Jerusalem. And we looked at the Kaaba mentions and the meaning of the expression, meaning a shrine, and it could also refer to the temple in Jerusalem, or maybe some other shrines in the vicinity of Jerusalem. So now let's look at item number 5 and all the others, if we can tonight. We go to the right slide. This is the Kaaba, and let's start there. Let's start there with the al-Qura. The al-Qura, it means the mother of cities. There is only one occurrence of the expression in the whole Quran, and it's found in verse 92 in Surah 6. This is a scripture, a kitab, so it can be also translated as a book, but the best translation is scripture, which we have sent down, blessed and confirming what was before it, that you may warn the mother of cities and those around it. So it's supposed to be Mecca. This is Murad's translation, a very literal translation. This writing we have descended, blessed, authenticated, that between his two hands. So it's an expression that can be understood as confirming what was before it. And for thee to warn the mother of settlements, mother of cities. So the issue is very simple here. The Islamic narrative says it's Mecca. Why not? It can also be Jerusalem, since Jerusalem was very central as a city and as a religious city in the 6th and the 7th century. So here there is really no issue here. This expression could refer to any major city, especially cities that could have a connection to Judgment Day. There is something in the verse about a warning. May warn the mother of cities about what? About the coming of Judgment Day. And we will develop this a bit afterwards when we will talk about Safa and Marwa. But Jerusalem has a fundamental role in eschatology. It is the place where the nations are supposed to be gathered, so the place of gathering. And this is the place where God is supposed to judge all nations at the end of times. So all the more clues to point at Jerusalem, even though it is not a very specific expression. So any comment on this? al-Qura is quite simple.
I mean, the one issue is just the constant vagueness in all the Quran's language. It's incredibly vague, which allows them to spin any narrative on top of it.
Well,
I agree.
Well, this one, if you read everything in context, and I mean everything from Surah 2, well, the scripture that was sent down confirming that about the mother of cities, which, yes, it actually sounds very much like it's going to be Jerusalem. The scripture is talking about is the gospel or the Injil, because the Torah was not revealed in Jerusalem. So it would be the Judeo-Nazarenes talking about the gospel that was sent down, because they believed that it was a book sent down and confirming things to do with Jerusalem. So that actually makes absolute perfect sense.
Yeah, I think exactly the same. As for the vagueness of the text, it seems vague and it looks very vague when we look only at one verse, for example, this one. But when you have a sort of global reading of the Quran, really it points to Jerusalem, it points to a Judeo-Christian background, a biblical background. Everything seems to pertain to the eschatological views that are developed in the Bible and in the Judeo-Christian milieu. And there it is not vague anymore.
Okay. With all of the retranslation and repurposing and you making things say something else than they originally did in the Quran, could al-Qura have anything to do with the mother of the Quran? Right? Remember, because we had chapter 48 of the Quran, Bani Israel, which became Isra, right? So they changed it from one to the other, so it doesn't talk about the Israelis anymore, because you can't have that in the Quran, because they were never in the Middle East, never in Jerusalem, never in Israel, right? That whole narrative. Qura, what if it was mother of the Quran, mother of the book, and then the mother of the book is Jerusalem, Galilee, etc.? What if it referred to that originally in context?
Those are not the same letter. It's Quran.
It's not the same word.
It's not the same word at all. There is another letter for Quran. If you want to look at the... Let's look, for example, here. So it's 692. I don't know, confirming which came before, so that you may warn. Al-Qura. So you have Qura, and it's different from Quran. Let me just have...
I should point out, Quran comes from Kiriana in Aramaic, so it's a completely different etymology.
Okay, just so maybe they played a little fast and loose to try and hide something there.
Okay, well, so let's go back to the presentation. So it's not really an issue. Let's go to the next item. Next item is the Hajj and Umrah. So the Quran described a city which described the pilgrimage and a sort of lesser pilgrimage, the Hajj and the Umrah, and they are linked to a city which is supposed to be Mecca. So we have numerous occurrences of Hajj, supposedly the great pilgrimage to Mecca during the sacred months. But there is something very strange about this word. If we look at the Arabic roots, Hajim, Hajj, the meaning of the root has no connection, no logical connection to a pilgrimage. The root refers to argue, to dispute. So it's really hard to see a connection with the Arabic etymology. And it's kind of the same with Umrah. When we look at Umrah, the Umrah had taken the meaning of the small pilgrimage in comparison to the great pilgrimage. And again, there is no logical connection to the Arabic etymology of the Ain Mimra root, which would mean to maintain, to build, and Murad has a funny translation, to urbanize, make a city, sort of. We have only 3 occurrences of Umrah in the Quran as referring to a sort of ritual or pilgrimage, and the other occurrences are not directly connected to the city of Mecca or to a sort of pilgrimage. Here, for example, is one of Murad's translation of the Umrah. It was not for the partnering one, so the mushrikun, the one who associate another god, to urbanize the prostration places of Allah. So I don't think Murad is completely right with this translation, because we will see that Umrah as well as Hajj are not Arabic words. And this is why they are completely disconnected from their Arabic etymology. Those are all the occurrences. I don't think we need to go through them with every detail. But let's just ask the question, do Hajj and Umrah refer to Jerusalem? And look at what the scholars, modern day scholars, have written about this. Robert Kerr, for example, in his article Aramaism in the Quran and Their Significance, has written that Hajj and Umrah constitute borrowing from Aramaic. So they are not Arabic words, which would explain why they are not connected with their Arabic etymology, their supposedly Arabic etymology. Hajj, according to him, and not only to him, comes from the Hebrew Hag, which means to circle and to go around. And it's a word that has become common to refer to a feast, a festivity in relation to the religious festivals that take place at the Jerusalem temple with circumambulations. So this is why it is based on the word which means to circle or to go around. And Umrah also comes from Aramaic. It could mean to dwell or to lead a monastic life. This is Robert Kerr's explanation. So this could refer to a sort of devotion or a sort of consecration. This could make sense with the Quran, the Quranic occurrences of Umrah, but we should also consider other explanation. One is very interesting. We have in the Hebrew language the word Omer. Omer is a measurement, a volume measurement, and it has become, in a derived meaning, it refers to an offering of a certain volume of cereals, I think wheat or maybe other cereals, that are offered in the temple during the festival, the Hajj of Pesach, of Passover. And it is very, very close to Umrah. If we look at some of the occurrences of the Umrah, let me just... It is almost, it is, I think, not almost, but always connected with the pilgrimage, with the Hajj. So, for example, whoever performs the Hajj to the house in Surah here, Surah 2, verse 158, whoever performs the Hajj to the temple in Jerusalem or performs Umrah, gives the offering. So no blame on him. You see, here it makes sense. There is a sort of, the Hebrew connection works. And it's kind of the same for, and complete the pilgrimage, complete the Hajj and the Umrah, the offering for God. There is another possible meaning to Umrah, which is interesting. I've put it in my book also, The Great Secret of Islam. I took it from French scholar and translator of the Quran in French, Régis Blacher. In his translation, he understood that the root Ain Mimra, Umra, that is used in Surah 52, verse 4, could be sort of connected with a kind of ritual service in the temple. Surah 52, verse 4 is a sort of allegory, a sort of poem, an evocation of the end of times, when everything will unfold and God's plan will be completed. And at the time, the temple will be served. Most English translations say that by the house frequented, the frequented house, which is a very strange thing to say because it doesn't mean anything. But if we take Régis Blacher translation into account, it's very eschatological. By the temple that is served by priests, which would allude to the reprisal, the reprisal of the ritual service in the temple, such as sacrifices. So this would give new meanings to the Hajj and Umrah word, and it is much more connected to what we can read in the Quran and even understand through a critical reading of the Islamic narrative. If we take for example, the example of the Hajj of Shavuot, so the pilgrimage of the weeks, Shavuot is weeks. It happens after Passover, so it's you have to count a jubilee of weeks, so 7 weeks after Passover, and it's the feast of the first fruits for the Jews. It celebrates the first harvest and the first fruits. It also commemorates the giving of the Torah on the Mount Sinai, that is described in the Bible. And if we look into the Jewish tradition, especially the Book of Jubilees, we see that we have rites of circumambulation that are described, supposedly going back as far as Abraham. Abraham took branches of palm trees and the fruit of goodly trees, and every day going round the altar with the branches 7 times in the morning and so, and he prays and he gives thanks to Yahweh and so on. And we still have this very same kind of rites in Mecca. In Mecca, they make 7 circumambulation around the place of Abraham, around the altar of Abraham. And we see here the very deep connection between Jewish traditions and Islam, actually. So in the end, I think that Hajj and Umrah could refer also to Jerusalem. And frankly, I think reading and understanding Hajj and Umrah as referring to Jewish rites in Jerusalem makes way much more sense in the Quran than the Islamic narrative explanation. So we have etymological arguments and the facts, the very simple fact that it makes so much more sense when you take the Hebrew or Aramaic meaning of the words than the supposedly Arabic and Islamic meaning of the words.
Can I make some comments?
Of course. Please.
So first of all, the way the word Hajj is pronounced in Egypt and Yemen is exactly the way it's pronounced in Hebrew. It's still pronounced Hag. It's the first thing which would indicate there is definitely a borrowing there. The second thing, there's a confirmation of your thesis here in a Jewish text called Pirkei Mashiach, Now, I've got it from a book by, what's his name? David Mitchell, called Messiah bin Joseph. He dates this to the late 7th century, but he doesn't know the full ins and outs of the Islamic tradition. So I would date it to the 8th century, a bit later. But here's the key thing, because it's all about the Jews and Muslims disputing whose sacrifice on the temple is more valuable in the eyes of God. So if I may just quote this, it just proves your point. And Israel will say to the king of the Arabs, "This is our temple, take silver and gold and leave the temple alone." But the king of the Arabs will say, "You have no claim at all in this temple, but if you select for yourselves, as in former days, an offering," there's your word, "as you did of old, then we will also bring a sacrifice, and whoever's offering is accepted, we will all become one people with them. And Israel will sacrifice and not be accepted, because Satan will denounce them before the Holy One, blessed be he." And so it goes on. So you have a dispute between the Arabs and the Jews over their offerings and their sacrifices. And the Jewish understanding is that their sacrifice must have been rejected for the Jews to lose control over the whole the Temple Mount. So that's how the Jews are kind of understanding it. They've sinned, God is displeased with them, and therefore they've lost the efficacy of this sacrifice. So this really confirms it. So if we were to change the word temple here with any of the Arabic terms for, it could be al-Bayts, or it could be the help me here, give me the I'm a bit tired today.
al-Maqdis, for example.
The Masjid al-Haram, sorry, that was the one.
Masjid al-Haram,
Yeah. So if we were just simply to change the wording here slightly, you could see it. Take silver and gold and leave the Masjid al-Haram alone. But the king of the Arabs will say, "You have no claim at all in this Masjid al-Haram." So you can see how this text here could be very clearly a confirmation of what's going on in the Quran and your thesis, I think.
It also echoes the chronicle of Sebeos, or pseudo-Sebeos. Sebeos relates a dispute between the Jews and the Arabs over the occupation of the Temple Mount.
Yeah. There's one other thing. Oh, sorry.
I was just about to say that such a dispute would very much fit the book you're quoting. So it's the book of Messiah Joseph.
This is. I don't know if I can show you. This is the book here. But he quotes from a Jewish text called Pirkei Mashiach.
Pirkei Mashiach.
Pirkei Mashiach. It's well worth getting. There was something else. Al-Hajjaj or Al-Hagag. That would mean a pilgrim to the Jerusalem temple. So the second in command, his nickname is the pilgrim to the Jerusalem temple, if you follow the Jewish understanding of what a Hagag is. So that again is, late 7th century, early 8th century. You're seeing here a key person is a pilgrim to Jerusalem.
Yeah. Remember I sent you guys that note? I think I got it from JC about Al-Hajjaj, which someone said no, that's from the Yemeni, and it's a very common name in Yemeni Jews, Hajjaj. And we have Al-Hajjaj, who J. Smith often speaks of. Does that play into that in any way? Because that seems to be a Jewish surname, a Yemeni Jewish surname.
I don't think it's exclusive to Yemen. It's anyone who's a pilgrim to Jerusalem. So I haven't seen any evidence it's exclusive to Yemen. I'm not saying it's not being used, but any of the diaspora would use that term to refer to someone who makes the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, as I understand it.
In Arabic, there is no.
If I can ask a question as well about the Hajj and Umrah, do you know if, based on your readings and your studies, whether that would have been made compulsory by the Judeo-Nazarenes from day one, or if maybe the verses in the Quran that say that they have to do the Hajj and Umrah were not intended to be for all of the followers, perhaps only for the preachers of this faith?
No, I think it's mandatory for every believer, but the thing is, the Hajj here, I don't think it refers to a sort of frequent practice of pilgrimage. It's a sort of it's a name they have taken for the project of conquering Jerusalem, and at least being able to perform the pilgrimage there. And so you see there is a sort of equivalence in the mind of the preacher and of the believers. Performing the Hajj is equivalent to conquering Jerusalem, rebuilding the temple, and at last performing the pilgrimage. So,
well, for Jews as well, the only place where they can offer sacrifices on the Temple Mount. So it's absolutely central and hugely important. And they had been denied that for centuries. So the uniqueness of the location is a further argument in favor of your thesis, I would argue.
Yeah, there is an evident prerequisite to performing the Hajj. The prerequisite is controlling Jerusalem, controlling the Temple Mount, and being able to access it. We have a sort of indication of this in Surah 48. I intend to speak about it a bit later, but Surah 48, so Al-Fat, the victory, relates, I think, an attempt from the believers to access the Temple Mount, a failed attempt since they were expelled from it by other Jews. And they tried to do it in order to perform the Hajj. And there is a description here of the preparation they needed for this. So they had animals adorned with garlands and so on, and they had shaven heads, and they had done a sort of ritual preparation to be in Hiram, a sacred sort of sacred preparation, and this was the Hajj was possible because they were able to access the Temple Mount. So you have here the connection between the Hajj as a ritual practice and its political prerequisite, which is controlling the Temple Mount. And in the end, what we see in Surah 48 is that they were not powerful enough to access the Temple Mount. They were expelled from it, and so I think Surah 48 highlights the fact that it's necessary to constitute a force strong enough to conquer Jerusalem and the Temple Mount in order to perform the Hajj. And so Hajj and conquering Jerusalem are sort of equivalent in the Quran.
Right. Thank you, Mary Alex, and for the new subscriptions. Thank you very, very much. Really appreciate it. Yeah, this one's out of my. This is beyond my particular historical understanding, so I'm not really commenting much. This one's beyond me. It's not a topic I'm well familiar with. Okay. Dr. K, anything from you? And good luck, Sergeant Grinch. All the best with your treatment. We'll be keeping in our prayers.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. This is a little bit above my research, so Because I actually was thinking that the original Mecca, based on Dan Gibson, was in Petra. But this is very interesting, and I think it could still be one or the other. But now I think after listening to Odin, I think I'm leaning towards the Jerusalem theory.
Yeah. We talked a bit about Dan Gibson's theory or hypothesis in our last presentation, and Mel, I think you said that his Qibla calculations are sometimes not that accurate about Petra, and I also highlighted that in order to build his Petra theory, he completely ignored the Quranic studies. The Quranic studies don't point to Petra. He talked about Petra maybe being the mother of cities. Yeah, why not? But it's almost the only expression in the Quran that could refer to Petra. There was no Masjid al-Haram in Petra. There was no place of Abraham in Petra. And I think the Hajj and the Umrah most likely they refer to Jerusalem much more than Petra. I have absolutely no evidence for a pilgrimage in Petra. Petra was a Christian city at the time. This is something to bear in mind. There was a bishop in Petra.
Sorry, finish your point, Odin, then I'll ask a question.
You see, according to the Islamic narrative, the Arabs before Islam were supposedly pagans, and Gibson sort of gives credit to this fantasy, and he claims that the Hajj would have taken place, sort of a pagan Hajj would have taken place in Petra, but it was not possible at the time because Petra was Christian.
Well, the couple of points, perhaps. One place of pilgrimage was on the border of Saudi and Yemen in, oh my gosh, now I just forgot the name of the city. There was a city. Oh gosh. I've discussed it in the past.
Najran?
Say again?
Najran, was it?
Najran, yes. That was a place of pilgrimage. So that's another potential Arabic pilgrimage location with Christians and a bunch of heretics also. But besides that, let's just put that as a point on just as a puzzle piece, not connected to anything right now. The other point is I want to ask, who were these Judeo-Nazarenes or whomever? Who were they trying to take Jerusalem back from, if I may? From the Christians.
From the Christians. This is a point I also intend to develop in a bit.
Okay, no, that's fine. So this just a hint that I have. Just I mean, my brain trying to make connections here, because if you look at what was happening with the Yemeni Jews, right, to the king of Yemen back then, I mean, he was a very jihadi Jew in this case, right? In terms of their culture, they were converting people at the point of the sword, which was effectively the Muslim creed. They were following in that style, which is very odd. Because Judaism is not in theory, a proselytizing religion, but he was making Christians convert at the point of the sword, which is a Muslim practice that, as we know. And maybe these Yemeni Jews have some link or connection because then the Muslims went and did the same thing, and he hated the Christians. So could there be some connection to this particular strand ideology of Judaism within Yemen, and then Najran, and then them wanting to, because they hated the Christians, they wanted back their site.
The connection might have happened during the vast period of time when the Islamic narrative was fabricated. When they tried to interpret the Quran in an Islamic way, maybe some traditionists remembered the Yemeni Jews and so on, and they it was easier for them to make connections with them because Mecca was closer to Yemen than Jerusalem is. Yeah, but it's a piece of the puzzle, as you put it. And if you want, we can go on to another piece of the puzzle, which is the direction of prayer, the Qibla. It's very interesting to note that the word Qibla, there is a word in Arabic for before, Qablu, I think, which means before. And the Qibla is actually what is before. It's not literally a direction of prayer. It is what is before, meaning a tradition. So it can also mean a tradition concerning the prayer. And because of this, it can mean the direction of prayer in a derived meaning. We also have this in Hebrew. We have the very same word, Kabbalah, which means the tradition. What was before? It means what was before. So it means the tradition from the ancestors, and it has given the the word Kabbalah, so the Kabbalah. The real word for the direction of prayer is Qiblat, as the tradition for the direction of prayer. And there is in the Quran there are other expressions to refer to the direction of prayer. There is other words and expressions than Qibla. There is the expression when one turns one's face towards the good direction of prayer. So it's about the turning of oneself, the turning of the face, with various Arabic expression for this. Here is Murad's take on the Qibla. For him, the Qibla is a proper noun. He doesn't translate Qibla, he says Qibla. Maybe because he hasn't looked into into Hebrew.
Let me throw something in there. Let me just share my screen just for a brief moment. Yeah, because I think you're way ahead of us all here, Odon. I think none of us are quite on the same page with you right now. You seem to be, but this is from, okay, so Kabbalah, right? This is from the online etymology dictionary. Kabbalah, Jewish mystic philosophy, but this dates from the 1520s, which comes from Merkava mysticism. Everyone speaks of Kabbalah, but really that's a fairly recent phenomenon, and there's some weirdnesses around it. I'll get into the conspiracy theory stuff later, okay? But medieval Latin, Kabbalah, from Mishnaic Hebrew, Kabbalah, meaning reception, received law, tradition, okay? Great. And then especially tradition of mystical interpretation of the Old Testament. So things go weird there, okay? But notice from kibbel, to receive, to admit, to accept, to submit, Islam, okay? To receive, to admit, to accept, okay? Islam, to submit to. But notice, compare Arabic, Kabbalah. This is a very little known fact. Kabbalah in Arabic, he received, he accepted, hence any secret or esoteric science in Islam. And that's a little bit of an odd sort of loose end there, you know?
It's the same meaning as in Arabic. It's we accept what is before. Yeah. In this way, it means tradition. And when it pertains to the prayer, it's the direction of prayer.
Yeah, but notice the occult meaning here, esoteric science, because when they talk about that in Islam, they talk about the occult. And notice when it goes here, tradition of mystical interpretation. And we can tie this back to some weirdness in the late 1st, early 2nd century, where you have Gnostics that have very strong Jewish overtones, but those same practices and many of the same stories very strongly parallel things in Islam. So I'm just seeing a tie here, a connection.
Yeah. But let's not confuse our audience. The Jewish Kabbalah was not fully developed in the 6th and 7th century. So there's no need to make a connection here with the Kabbalah.
Okay.
But there is a grammatical and etymological connection, which is very interesting. Which is why,
I'll just drop that link into the chat for anyone to have a look at. Arabic Kabbalah. Anyone else? Mel, you added your screen? I can't hear you, Mel. You are muted, I believe. Mel, you have muted yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Sorry about that.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so this interpretation that I'm going to give you fits in with the idea of a messianic expectation. So you see the verse 143 there. We already see the continuous inversion of thy face in the sky. So if we look to the Gospels, the book of John, what happens after the ascension? They're looking up into the sky, from whence the Messiah will return. So I think this is a messianic reference here to the idea that the Messiah will return from the sky. And it fits in with the wider messianic movement that's going on. That's just a suggestion. I don't know how well it fits in with everything else, but there seems to be a qibla towards the Temple Mount versus this other one looking up in the sky. Now, there was a tradition in the Christian churches. I looked into this over a number of centuries, that there was an extra gospel towards the end of a mass, which actually was to do with that part of John's gospel with the ascension. And people stood for that. So kind of, I think there is something in there. That's it.
What do you mean at the end of the mass? In the traditional Latin mass, we used to read the prologue, the foreword of John's gospel.
I don't know if it's the prologue. It was a part. I'm going from memory here, but I think it had something to do with the gospel to do with the ascension, as far as I know. And it's kind of like it might have been the prologue, but the idea was coming full circle. So John's gospel finishes with them looking up into the sky, and then it loops back to the beginnings again. So at the end becomes the beginning becomes the end, and it's the idea of the Messiah returning, forming that loop. But whether that's it could be a little bit of a stretch, but perhaps there was a Jewish understanding that parallels a Christian understanding that the Messiah would come from the sky, and that maybe that's what's going on here.
But this is literally what the gospel says, that Jesus will come back with I don't know the English translation, but with great glories on the clouds.
I was about to say that exactly.
From the clouds. So there is something of there is something of a connection with the sky.
And there's something.
But actually, I will develop this. I think it's much more simple in the Quran. This idea of the sky. It's very easy when we look at the text. But before going into it, let's just highlight that Islamic narrative has developed this idea of Muhammad ordering the prayer to be directed toward Jerusalem at first, and then receiving a verse urging him to change this Qibla, this tradition, and to order a new prayer directions toward Mecca, towards Masjid al-Haram, so the sacred mosque supposedly in Mecca. And if we look at the verses, it doesn't make sense actually. Here I have selected all verses referring to the Qibla or the turning of one's face. We have a long passage from verse 142 in Surah 2 up to verse 150. Which describes this the change in the Qibla. It describes a former tradition and then a new tradition. The former tradition is described as being as turning one's face to the sky or to the heaven or to the east and the west. If we look at it in verse 144, indeed we see the turning of your face toward the heaven, the sky. It's a sky, it's the same word. So we will surely turn you according to a tradition you will be pleased with. How come the believers were not pleased with their former tradition? Their former tradition is supposedly a prayer direction towards the sky, but it's very vague here. If we look at the Quran in verse 177 in Surah 2, the sky it is described as being the direction prayer towards the sky. Is described as being turn your face toward the east and the west. So al-Mashriq wal-Maghrib. And the east and the west, those are the exact same word in Arabic for sunrise and sunset. So the sky prayer direction is defined by the sunrise and the sunset. So it's a direction from the east to the west or the west to the east, which is exactly the traditional Christian prayer orientation. A Christian used to pray and to have their masses directed toward the sunrise, toward the east. And we can understand that the Quran does not talk about a sort of vague pagan tradition of praying toward the sky, but about the Christian tradition of praying toward the east. And this gives a new meaning and a much more interesting meaning to the change of the direction of prayer. If you see here in verse 142 in Surah 2, is it the good one? No, excuse me. Verse 144. We give you a new tradition you will be pleased with. And this new tradition is to turn your face toward the Masjid al-Haram, the sacred mosque, the forbidden place of worship. You're inserting
the word new there that's not there. A tradition is by definition old.
Yeah, of course. We give you a sort of new teaching you will be pleased with. Turn your face toward the direction. Instead of turning your face toward the heaven, turn your face toward the Masjid al-Haram. So turn your face toward Jerusalem.
Yeah, but if we take the longer historical view, at the time of the book of Daniel, it refers to praying out a window towards Jerusalem.
Yeah, already. So
that's
this
all.
Is why it's also a tradition.
Just let me just finish. Is that that was an old tradition? The Jews prayed towards Jerusalem. Then the tradition died out, and now they're talking about resuming that tradition, going back to the tradition of praying towards.
This is exactly what the verse tells us afterwards.
Yeah.
If you look at the rest of the verse, turn your face toward the direction of Masjid al-Haram, so toward Jerusalem. And wherever that you are, turn your faces in its direction. And indeed, those who were given the scripture surely know that it is the truth from their Lord, and God is not unaware of what they do.
Yeah.
If we read this verse with the Jerusalem reading instead of Mecca, it makes sense. Because those who were given the book, there are those who read Daniel, for example. The Jews knew that they were supposed to pray toward Jerusalem. If you look at the Islamic narrative reading of the verse, it makes no sense at all. In the Islamic reading of the verse, Muhammad receives a new commandment from God. You used to pray toward Jerusalem, but now you have to pray towards Mecca. And those who were given the book before you, so the Jews and the Christians, surely know that it is the truth from the Lord. How come the Jews and the Christians could have known that they were supposed to pray toward Mecca? It makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. Whereas if you look at the other hypothesis, the hypothesis of the new or the excuse me, the change of the Qibla being that toward Jerusalem and not Mecca, there it makes sense. And it makes sense with the whole of the Quran. If you look at the following verse 145 in Surah 2, here again, the Islamic narrative makes no sense. Even if you come to those who were given the scripture with all the signs, so it's a word ayatin, it can mean verses also, not they will follow your tradition, your Qibla, your prayer direction, and not will you be a follower of their tradition. And not some of them are follower of the tradition of others. And if you follow their desires after what came to you of the knowledge, indeed, you would then be surely among the wrongdoers. If we look at the Islamic reading of this verse, so Muhammad here has changed the prayer direction from Jerusalem to Mecca. And thereafter, he explains the Jew, you have your tradition, you pray toward Jerusalem, we pray toward Mecca, everyone has got his religion, everything is for the better. But it's very strange because in the preceding verse, he's supposed to have been taught by God that the Jews knew that Mecca was supposedly the right direction. So this verse makes no sense in the Islamic reading. Whereas if you look and you try to understand it with Jerusalem in mind, we have a preacher who has been instructed to give up his traditional Christian rite of praying towards the rising sun, and instead he has to adopt a prayer direction towards Jerusalem, which is the same prayer direction as the Jews. But will he then be the same as the Jews? If he does the same prayer in the same direction as the Jews, wouldn't he be considered as a Jew himself? And this is the answer that the verse 145 gives. It tells the preacher, even if you come to the Jews with the scripture, with all the verses, and even if you pray in the same direction as them, they will not follow your tradition because you are different from them. And not will you be a follower of their tradition. It is not because you pray in the same direction that you are alike. You pray toward Jerusalem for your own reason because you wait the Messiah to come back here. And they pray toward Jerusalem for their own reason because they have the tradition of Daniel and so on. And maybe some of them expect the Messiah to come back here, but it won't be the same Messiah.
Yeah. Right. Might be worth looking at the Daniel quote.
Yeah, I'm going to bring that up. Just a moment. Villainous asks, is Kabbalah just a Gnostic infestation in Judaism? Villainous, in theory, Gnosticism really established itself 3rd, 4th century after Christianity. Essentially, Gnosticism originally started to attack the book of John. So it seems to come after the book of John, essentially. And however, Gnosticism, when you look at Hermeticism, Gnosticism seems to be an offshoot of Hermeticism. There are similarities and there are differences. Kabbalah seems to be, to some degree, possibly influenced by Hermeticism, but really, which obviously is an Egyptian idea, shall we say. So it seems to be that the Egyptian mystery religions has some kind of element there. But that said, when you look at one phase of something, over the centuries, they might take on multiple different phases. The thing might change more. Hermeticism, if you look at the ancient Egyptian, you have one expression of it. Then you look once the Greeks got there, it changes. Then once the Romans got it, it changed. And then once it got to the Middle Ages, it changed. So you've got to be very careful. You've got to place it within its context, geography, and time to really understand it. But without going further, I'll just leave it at that. It's something I actually should talk about in the future. Mm-hmm. And then Mal wants to bring up Odon. Did you want to say anything on that, or?
I think it's a bit off topic. It's interesting,
sure.
Nonetheless.
No, on,
I'm really, really interested in the story of Gnosticism and Kabbalah, but it's a bit off topic in regard to our presentation.
Yeah, but,
So-
but I mean, what to Mel?
Sorry. So I think this is
Mhm.
worth considering in relation to Surah 2 in terms of what's going on with the Qiblas. So this is the Jewish tradition, even if it wasn't continued. When Daniel learned that the decree had been signed and posted, he continued to pray just as he had always done. His house had windows in the upstairs that opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he knelt there in prayer, thanking and praising his Lord. So the implication there is he's praying towards Jerusalem. So I think any reference to going to a tradition that will please you, I think is returning to a former tradition that the Jews would be happy with, which is praying towards the temple.
And you agree, Mel, with my interpretation of verse 145 then?
Yes. Yeah.
This is the idea that the Jews know that they have to pray towards Jerusalem.
Yeah.
No, you, the preacher and the believers, you will have to pray towards Jerusalem. You will be happy to do so because the Messiah will come back there. But it does not make you the same as the Jews.
Yeah.
You have your tradition, they have their tradition.
There's another thing that actually needs to be borne in mind, and this is an argument that A.J. Juice makes quite convincingly, which is the Jews believe the Shekinah, which is the Holy Spirit or the presence of God, is wherever the Exilarch lived. So some Jews prayed in the direction of the Shekinah. Now, that would be not very popular with some Jews. The Jews that viewed the Exilarch as their leader, fine. But there would have been some Jews that would say this is an aberration. This is going a bit too far.
This is also, I think, what the Quran is about. The Quran constantly makes a distinction between good Jews and bad Jews. If you look at the following verse, for example, I've put it in italics because it does not refer to the Qibla, but it's interesting nonetheless. Verse 146, those who were given the scripture, the book, so the Jews, they recognize it like they recognize the sons. And indeed, a group of them, surely they conceal the truth while they know. You see here, the Quran's author seems to be obliged to make a difference between the good Jews who know the truth and the one who conceals the truth. Which is, I think, why...
I think there's a pun here as well. I don't know if you know. There's a Jewish term called bareta, or bareta, which bar can mean son. And let me just look up the definition. But these are Jewish texts. Let me just give you if I can find it quickly.
Yeah, it's part of the Mishnah and the Talmud and so on. They say the Bereta says, so it's like a commentary. It's like a commentary on the Mishnah.
You'll find them in the Talmud. It's Tanaitic tradition absent from the Mishnah, transcribed by later sources. So there is a kind of a pun there with Bereta because of the bar part. Maybe I'm seeing too much in it, but.
Before we move on from this page, if I can ask one question, just because Odon, you brought up Surah 2, verse 146. So when it says, and indeed, a group of them, surely they conceal the truth while they know it. Well, they know. What is the truth that they conceal?
I think my interpretation, the truth they conceal is that Jesus is the Messiah. And they denied his messiahship. I think the Quran, the distinction between good Jews and bad Jews is about Jesus' messiahship in the Quran. Those who recognize Jesus as the Messiah and those who don't. So the good Jews are the Nazarene Jews and the bad Jews are the rabbinic Jews who deny that Jesus is Israel's Messiah. And the truth was given to them. The truth came to them. We see in many verses in the Quran that the truth came to them, which means that Jesus preached to them, actually.
Yeah, my reading exactly as well. Thank you. It would be good to...
Can I also point out Surah 1087 there that you have, which seems to be the concept of a moving temple, or temples, plural.
Temples.
Settle your people in Egypt in temples,
in houses,
and make your temples according to the tradition. So it's showing a recognition that in the past, the temple wasn't a static location. It was wherever they put their tent, that was where the Shekinah was. So,
especially during the Exodus. I'm sorry, Jason. We spoke together.
Sorry, it's the Paul Young religion. Wherever I lay my hat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So I think that we can also understand the Quran as here about the Qibla as not referring to Mecca but to Jerusalem. The change in the prayer direction could be interpreted as a shift from Christian rites to facing Jerusalem. And it's another brick in the wall.
I think it only fits in terms of the Jewish context. It only fits with Jerusalem. There's no way Muslims can make the argument that Jews ever prayed towards Mecca. That never happened.
Yeah, that never happened. And it's I think all the more convincing that it refers to Masjid al-Haram, and we already saw that Masjid al-Haram is most probably the Temple Mount and not the area around the Kaaba in Mecca.
Well, do you know there was an earthquake in 1924 and it opened up a major crack in the floor of the Dome of the Rock? And what they discovered was two different archaeological strata and locations. The first is they discovered several what they call mikvahs, or these are Jewish ritual baths underneath the floor of the Temple Mount. In fact, there were several rooms, but of course the Antiquities Authority, the Muslims, prevented any archaeology. Well, once they discovered that, they shut it down, and they've for the last 100 years, it's a century now. Yeah, they've prevented archaeology, and luckily there was the archaeologist who went in there, made some notes and provided some photos. So the Temple Mount is sitting on top of an ancient Jewish temple, and it's sitting on top of multiple sacred locations and ritual baths. But along with that, next to that location, also under the floor of the Dome of the Rock, is a Byzantine marble floor. So there was a Byzantine church that was there. Now we know that the Dome of the Rock is modeled on the Church of the Kathisma, which they obviously leveled and covered, and it's recently been discovered. So, which I think was a deliberate strategy. But now you're finding another Byzantine church underneath the floor of the Dome of the Rock. Plus, there are rooms and staircases and stuff. So clearly, there's much more. Now, obviously, the Jews decided to build these on Muslim land under the Dome of the Rock before the Muslims got there, which is, I don't know how they stole the Muslims' land before the Muslims arrived, which is just shocking. But I mean, what do you take away from that then? So we know there were Muslims on that mount. Sorry, there were Christians and Jews.
Very knowledgeable about the Dome of the Rock.
Sorry, say again.
I said ask Mel about this because he is very knowledgeable about the Dome of the Rock. You did several presentations on the Well of Souls and so on.
Yeah,
and Islam is very allergic to archaeology.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything additional to what you said. Just to say, all of what you said is spot on, correct. But I think I suppose it's not unusual that there would have been Byzantine churches on the site because the Christians had Jerusalem for centuries before the Jews regained it. So obviously they're going to build their churches on it. And it's kind of no surprise that particularly the Ottomans would imitate Byzantine styles of architecture as well when it comes to building the Dome of the Rock. I think the Dome of the Rock as we have it today was built by the Ottomans. I think there were lots of different buildings over the centuries. So originally I would have noticed the similarity between the Dome of the Rock and the Kathisma, but that's I've subsequently, if we are thinking about the dating of the Ottomans, it's kind of a hard case to make that they built it to match that, because by that stage it would have been erased and buried. But there were other similar style buildings, Byzantine buildings with 8 sides, so it might be just that they were copying a very.
There was one in Bethlehem. I mean, there's one known in Bethlehem. There's a couple in that region. So the idea remains, though. It's obviously part of the consciousness. It's well known.
Oh,
and dome, in fact, but the dome on top of the dome is also reminiscent of the Byzantine style.
Yeah, it was very common, pretty much everywhere in the Byzantines, and the archaeology or the architects that the Ottomans would have hired to build, they would have been formerly Christians, or quite a few of them. So their knowledge would have been on Byzantine churches, and then the Muslims take over what we call today Turkey, but they're basically taking the expertise from the population and then making the mosques. They're obviously imitating all the knowledge of the Byzantine churches in these constructions.
And oddly, I mean, the fact that the Dome of the Rock specifically refers to Solomon's temple, which is really odd, because as everyone knows, there were no Jews in Israel ever, because the Palestinians were there.
Yeah. The true Jews were in Mecca, of course, which is the true place of Abraham.
I love the fact that in the 7th century, the country, at least by the Romans, was being called Palestine, and yet the Quran proclaims Israel everywhere with Bani Israel, Bani Israel, Bani Israel, and so on.
In fact, it specifically refers to the children of Israel. It never once calls the Arabs the children of anything, because Allah's not a father. Don't forget, and it never mentions the Palestinians one time, but it specifically goes out of its way to give Israel to the children of Israel and tie them to the land.
That's kind of awkward for Arabs today.
The thing here is that the Arabs as a nation did not exist before Islam, so there was no need for a sort of name for a nation that did not exist.
Yeah,
but they were also called Ishmaelites, and this we should bear in mind. Saracen Ishmaelite is something of a biblical name, huh?
But on the older maps, the
Saracens
are in the north. The Saracens are up north of Arabia, so it's interesting. You find them parked up top.
Even the term Arabs is actually quite tricky, because there were a sizable population of Jews in Iraq from about the 7th, 8th, 9th century onwards who were speaking Arabic. So that confuses things. We can't even assume that the Arabs are necessarily non-Jewish. Some
Christian Arabs of Syria as well, sizable populations.
Also in Jordan. But the thing with Arabs, Arabs, it's a bit like Hebrew. It's the same word, actually. Arab does not refer to originally to the member of a nation, but it refers to Semitic people who spoke Arabic.
Yeah.
And it became a nation because of Islam.
Yeah.
Islam defined Arabs as the new nation chosen by God, and it defined Arabic as the sacred language of God. And so Arabizing non-Arabic speaking people sort of resumed to making them into Arabs. Phoenicians, for example, in Lebanon, there are no Arabs. But since they speak Arab, and since nowadays more than half of them are Muslims, they are supposed to be Arabs. The same with Assyrians or Chaldeans. They are not Arabs per se. But since they speak Arabic, Islam views them, and nowadays the world views them as Arab people. even though the pure Arab people were in Arabia and moved in the Levant, a bit in Egypt and in Mesopotamia, and settled there in the centuries. But the other people were not Arab, but Arab at the time. Shall we go to the next item? Next item is Becca.
Yeah, I think we're just trying to catch up with you, Odon. You're ahead of us on this. I mean, the other two guys are silent because I think we're all kind of like, learning here.
I should have given you my presentation beforehand. Maybe it would have helped.
That's all right, because we are recording this, so we can go back and watch it later in a slow motion.
Okay. Anyhow, Becca is much more simple. Becca, it's a one occurrence word in the Quran, in Surah 3, in verse 96. Indeed, the first house, the first bait, established for mankind was that at Becca, blessed and a guidance for the world. In it are clear signs such as the standing place of Abraham, and whoever enters it shall be safe, and due to God from the people is a pilgrimage to the house. Our good friend Murad translates Baka as Baka. There is no translation here. It's a proper noun. It's supposed to be understood as Beka or Baka. The exact occurrence is Bi Bakata, so it means at Baka or by Baka. And we have various spelling for Baka. It's Baka, Beka, Beka. And supposedly, according to the Islamic reading of the Quran, it's another name for Mecca. So Mecca is Mecca, but it is also called Becca because it is convenient to read the Quran this way. It gives it an Islamic meaning. Otherwise, one couldn't say what Becca is actually. Because if we look at these two verses, Becca is supposed to be the place of the first temple. We have seen that house mostly refers to the Jerusalem temple. It is also a place which is referred to by the Maqam Ibrahim, the standing place of Abraham, of which there are clear signs. We already saw it in the previous presentation. It refers to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And it is also the place of the Hajj. And we saw that it can also refer to a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So just by taking only these elements into account, we could say that Becca must be in Jerusalem or near Jerusalem. We don't need to go further into it, but we have to ask the question, what exactly is Becca? And scholars have asked the question and answer it.
I think scholars don't want to answer it. They have the dots. They don't want to connect them because they like keeping their stipends. Personally,
most of them,
I want to throw something in here, if I may. Yeah, go ahead.
But luckily, we have some scholar who did who worked on this and and who found the evidence that Becca is near Jerusalem. And here I want to refer to Robert Kerr, of course.
Before you go on, can I throw something else in?
Yeah, of course.
Just to offer an alternative, and then you can go back to this. Because, I mean, the fact that you might have two different strands doesn't mean that the one is wrong and one is right. It could be both are right. At one time, there was, so, I mean, I just want to throw this in there. So this goes back to my monotheism stuff. And so this, Al-Makkah, was the god of, at one time was the god of the Kaaba in Mecca, which is odd because the god is also called Mecca or Makkah as the which is the regional pronunciation, right? So glory be to Allah. Now the Baka symbol, this is Baka. The Baka symbol means glory be to Allah. That name is kind of familiar. I know there's a deity. Oh my gosh, I'm sure there's a deity familiar deity called Allah. Good grief. If I can Someone can help me make the connection here. So al-Makkah, right? Because also remember the Arabs call Mecca Makkah. So al-Makkah was probably known as Allah already. I mean, he was known as Allah in pre-Islamic times. Allah was a known deity. He was Shin, the Babylonian moon god. Now the Yemenis worship the very same deities, just under local names, not necessarily the strict Babylonian name, but it was the same pantheon, the same gods. And the Bakka symbol, glory be to Allah. Now the Bakka symbol is this curvy symbol here, if I recall. Okay, the temple is dedicated. This is Yemen, dedicated to al-Makkah. Mm-hmm. And the Bakka symbol, glory be to al-Makkah, glory be to Allah. Al-Makkah was Allah. Allah was al-Makkah. Mecca was Allah, right? And on top of that, you can tie this. Now, these guys were doing trading with the Greeks, the Romans, the Indians, and maybe even as far as China, who knows? But what happens is, like, for instance, scholars apparently in the beginning used to misrepresent certain idols. They'd find a Greek deity, a Greek statue in Yemen, and they go, oh, these guys were worshiping Zeus or whatever the case was. But no, they would simply take, it was cool to find a new deity or to find a beautifully made Greek statue, and then they would simply reuse that statue for one of their gods, or they'd introduce a new god, but they'd modify it to suit their culture, right, or their need. But so this term Bakka also apparently has a link to, and I haven't gone into depth, but I did some looking once. There's a tie here because of the Greek connection with Venus and Atar. There's a tie to the god Bacchus. That's the Roman Greek god Bacchus. That's the god of the harvest, the god of, I mean, he's not a good god. He's not a nice guy. So there's a tie here to this pantheon as well. And I'll just do one more. I mean, the coins that mention Shin, you see, Makkah is, oh, bugger, I went too far. Mm-hmm. What did I do here? Makkah is Shin. Let me just go back up. Bugger. Let me find it again. Give me a second. Here we go. You'll notice here, Shin, Sin, the Babylonian god. And this is in reference to Yemen now. And this is Makkah. This is Allah. Makkah is Allah. Allah is Shin. Shin is the Babylonian god. And it may have to do, there seems to be a link to Bacchus. Bakka, Bacchus. And Bacchus is Allah. Do you understand? All of these lines are converging on one point here. Your thoughts on that, guys?
I'm very skeptical. I think there's a danger of a linguistic fallacy here when words sound similar, and therefore making the assumption that there's a link. I kind of worry.
Apparently, there is a relationship of some sort. I mean, apparently there is. Once you go to Bacchus, I found it once, but I never decided to follow down the route. But apparently, these guys were trading. Yeah,
because even the word there is not Bacchus; it's Bak. B-A-K-H.
Bakka.
I don't see an ass. I mean, I'm not trying to be. Just have to be careful. We don't see
Arabic by
in
centuries. No, this precedes Arabic by centuries. But the sounds, all of the sounds in South Arabian are present in Arabic. I mean, it comes out of that. So this preceded this, and I mean, these guys dominated, controlled economically and militarily that whole region for centuries. So just thought I'd throw that out.
Right, it's interesting, but you have to compare this stuff you found with the Quranic study and the whole of the Quranic study. You'll see that the Quranic studies are coherent in pointing to Jerusalem, and especially with Mecca, and it is very coherent and logical. Whereas if you look at the South Arabian traditions you pointed at, it can make sense with a little bit of the Quran, but not with the whole of it. And it's a bit like what you showed us about Najran a moment ago. It might have had an influence in the making of the Islamic reading. But I don't think it had an influence in the actual original preaching out of which the Quran was made. So
the Quran seems to be from a Christian source. I mean, the Quran does seem to come from some sort of Christian source. You know, there seems to be that influence, but there's other influence in Islam which are obviously pagan as well. So there's all of these elements, these loose pieces lying around.
There are some loose pieces, but there is a. You'll see it will be maybe a bit more clear when you get the whole picture of, for example, the Jerusalem references in the Quran. They are whole coherent.
Everyone says there's only the one reference Bakka, but there's another Bakka, which is in Yemen.
But there is a Mecca in Jerusalem, for example. This is what's really astonishing, and it makes sense with the verse. Whereas if you take your Bakka reference from Yemen, what sense does it make with the verse? Is there a standing place of Abraham in Yemen? Was there a Hajj to a house there?
Yeah.
If you look at Bakka, the way Robert Kerr and Stephen Shoemaker studied it, you will see that there is. I will take Stephen Shoemaker's study here.
No, I don't disagree that the Quran goes there, but the fact that you've got Allah,
it is very coherent. It makes sense. Yeah. He wrote in this study the Quran's holy house, Mecca or Jerusalem. So it was first published in Ara volume last year, and thereafter last summer, Stephen Shoemaker published it in this book, The Quest for the Historical Muhammad. But at first it was published in a peer-reviewed review, so in Ara. And he wrote there that if you look at the verse, so the verse 96 to 97 in the Quran, in Surah 3, there is no connection with Mecca, between Becca and Mecca. It's very strange. There is, however, no justification for identifying Becca with Mecca. The Quran doesn't tell us anything about Becca. And besides, he also wrote that there is a remarkable intertextuality between this Quranic passage and Psalm 84, a passage rating Jerusalem's holy house with a barren place named Becca in the context of performing pilgrimage to the same Abrahamic house. This is in Psalm 84, a practice that the Hebrew Bible enjoins thrice yearly for the feast of Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, for the Hajj then. And if we look at the Psalm, it's evident. This is Psalm 84, verse 1 to 7.
I don't disagree with this at all, and it's 100%. It makes perfect sense. But we just go, well, we want to just ignore anything to the south because we must ignore all other evidence. The 7th century
this evidence is to be ignored. It has to be taken into account and compared with the other studies. And I think the most probable use for this evidence you provided is that it might have had an influence in the making of the Islamic reading. So in it's a second step after the Quran. At first there was the Quran, in which they speak about Becca as referring to Jerusalem, and thereafter maybe they thought it useful to look at to use this when the traditionist wrote the tradition. This Yemeni stuff might have had an influence there, because if you look at the psalm, it's evident that Becca, which is described in this psalm, is the Becca of the Quran. The psalm is about the pilgrimage to the temple in Jerusalem. How blessed are those who dwell in your house, your temple. They are ever praising you. Blessed are those whose strength is in you, whose heart are set on pilgrimage, which is exactly the same word as Hajj, as they pass through the valley of Becca. Sometimes it's translated as valley of weeping or valleys of poplars, not poplars, poplar trees. But in Hebrew, it's Becca. And so we have here a very strong connection, as Stephen Shoemaker put it in his scholarly way, a remarkable intertextuality.
To point out
to come to the conclusion, just let me read my conclusion. Becca can also refer to the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Won't you agree, Mel?
Yeah, it's just that this particular psalm was actually written with the intention of being used as a liturgical song for pilgrims actually going to Jerusalem. That's what the scholars say about it. You know.
It's pilgrimage literature. So it's a pilgrimage reference. Mecca is strongly linked to the Jerusalem pilgrimage. And it makes sense with the Quran. It's coherent with the verse here. The first temple established for mankind was that at Mecca. It's the Maqam Ibrahim, and this is why it is written here, due to God from the people is Hajj to the temple.
Yeah. Just go back to there, just look at the top. So you have how lovely is your dwelling place.
Yeah.
So that would be, that is your Masjid al-Haram.
The dwelling place is the tabernacle. It is the place of the Shekinah. It is the Masjid al-Haram then.
Yeah. And the courts of Yahweh, of course. You know, the Gentile courts, the courts of the women, the courts of the Israelites. Again, it's a Temple Mount. So obviously the Psalm is about the temple, but it only appears once in the Bible, in this particular Psalm, and only once in the Quran. So it's a very rare use of the word.
Mecca.
And I think what I heard with the particular word Mecca, it also has the connotation of a barren place that's dry.
This is why it's translated also as the Valley of Weeping, because of this.
Yeah.
So my conclusion here is that Mecca can also refer to the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and so it's another possible reference to Jerusalem instead of Mecca in the Quran. The next item is about Safa and Marwa. So it's almost very well known now, but maybe some people in your audience don't know that in verse 158, we have a depiction of supposedly two hills near Mecca. Indeed, Safa, so Al-Safa, and Marwa, Al-Marwa, are among the symbols of God. So whoever makes the Hajj, the pilgrimage to the house, or performs the Umrah, there is no blame upon him from walking between them. And I've put forth the translation of Murad here, because again, it doesn't translate Safa and Marwa. For him, there are proper nouns and the proper names of the two hills near the Kaaba. I don't know if he believes it or not, but this is how he translated it. And in the Islamic tradition, we find a very developed narrative about Abraham expelling his concubine Hagar with his son Ishmael in a barren place, so Mecca. And because it was barren and there was no water, she was desperate because she was in great danger of dying of thirst. Her Hagar and her son Ishmael, and so she ran back and forth 7 times between Safa and Marwa, looking for water or assistance, and she didn't find any. But luckily, the angel Jibril, eventually struck the ground and caused water to miraculously appear, and this became the Zamzam well. And because of this, Hagar and her son could drink, and they settled in what became Mecca.
Yeah, there's actually several versions of this. I've covered these. There's multiple versions. And I mean, a bird scratched the ground open. Her son, his heel hit the ground, and a well sprang forth. Angel dug it open with his wing. Another angel pointed. There's a whole bunch of these stories. And if Mecca was the oldest city with the oldest temple, and she was literally standing in the middle of it, where were the people?
Exactly. This is what J. Smith also oftenly points at. There were people settled there at the time, according to the Islamic narrative. So the desperate Hagar, she longed for water for days, and she did not have the very simple ideas to ask the inhabitants for water.
Yeah.
Because since there were people that settled there must have been water. But it's another incoherence. It's a strong one in the Islamic narrative. The only water source in Mecca is the Zamzam well. It's not a source, it's a well. But
So
before the Zamzam well was created by the angel or by a bird or by anything, there were still people living there without water, which is miraculous.
I've been out there. It's dry.
One of the problems there for Muslims is actually the biblical text, which is Genesis chapter 21, where Hagar and Ishmael are sent out. They're sent out from Beersheba, which is 600 miles from Mecca. So I would hazard a guess that even if they had a very large bottle of water, it's going to run out long before they ever reach Mecca.
Yeah.
So that's an issue. So obviously they've transposed this story from there all the way down to the Hijaz.
The story looks like an attempt to forcefully fit an Islamic narrative into the Quran. You see that this narrative put forth the idea that she had to make a circumambulation 7 times. So as she ran back and forth between the 2 hills, this idea is not in it comes from the Jewish tradition. It hasn't been invented by Islam.
They claim she made a 1,200 kilometer trek, right, through the desert with a young boy, 10 years old. However, we spoke of the Al-Haramain, right? Remember they speak of the 2 harams, Al-Haramain, the 2 harams, which are Hebron and Beersheba, right? Jerusalem and Hebron. Now, Abraham he died in Hebron, and he was in Beersheba. So if you look at the distance here, this is about a 43 kilometer, 27 miles. If she trekked this distance, that is quite logical because these are the 2 locations associated with Abraham, Hebron and Beersheba. That's quite acceptable. But to take a 1,200 kilometer walk, with 1 bottle of water, and then also Abraham walks with them and leaves them under the tree with some dates. So Abraham takes the trek as well.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of weirdness there. There's a lot of things that don't make sense in that narrative.
But that's there's a thing here also to be pointed at. Muslim and many non-Muslims, many Jews in particular, and also many Christians, they want to have a sort of literal reading of the book of Genesis as if it were an accurate depiction of historical events, as if it was written in this purpose. There was no journalist at the time recording the whereabouts of Hagar and Abraham, and from an historical point of view, a scientific point of view, you cannot assert the historical existence of Ishmael, Hagar, Abraham, and so on. This is not what the Bible is about, in my opinion. And the fact that some people desperately cling on the literal meaning of the text to sort of identify plausibility or unplausibility, I think they haven't understood the text at all, because the text is not about historical accuracy. It's something else. It tells something else. There is a sort of superficial understanding of the text, which is its literal reading, which is what Muslims do with the Quran and many non-Muslims do with the Bible also. But I don't think the book of Genesis is to be read this way. It's something else. was the world created in 7 days, for example? It's another debate. It's another debate. But if we look at Safa and Marwa, it's very easy to understand that it's not about two hills near the Kaaba. It's something else. If you look at Safa and Marwa in Mecca, those are supposed to be the hills. Actually, they are not hills. Safa and Marwa are boulders, big rocks near the Kaaba. They are not hills. Nowadays, they are enclosed in a huge mosque complex in order to accommodate for the millions of pilgrims who do the circumambulation rite, al-Masa, which is going back and forth between Safa and Marwa 7 times, supposedly like Hagar did in a search for water. This is an aerial view of Mecca. You see at the center the Kaaba, around is the Haram, and so you see here and here the roof and the roofs, the roof over Marwa and the roof over Safa, and so you have the circumambulation that is being done here. But the interesting thing is that if we look at another location, this is an aerial view of Jerusalem. Here we have on the left the former Temple Mount, now with the Dome of the Rock. Here we have the Mount of Olives. It's around here, Mount of Olives. So this is the Dome of the Rock, exactly. And it is built on the Temple Mount, and its biblical name is Mount Moriah. Moriah is exactly like Marwa in Arabic. And here we have another mount, which is called Mount Scopus, from the Greek verb scopein, to watch. It's the mount of the observers, the mount of the watchers. It's the mount. It was associated with the pilgrimage, because when you went to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage, you accessed Jerusalem through Mount Scopus, and from Mount Scopus you could watch the temple from the mount. And the name of the mount in Hebrew is Safa, Mount Safa.
So that's
we find this reference in Josephus in his Jewish antiquities.
The other thing that's worth pointing out, not only can you see the Dome of the Rock or the Temple Mount from Mount Scopus, but you can also see the Dead Sea from there. It's the only place in Jerusalem where you can see the Dead Sea. Now, that's where you find Lot's what should we call it?
Lot's wife, Lot's column.
Lot's column, yeah, which is also referenced in the Quran.
Yeah.
So, and it has an apocalyptic element to it, because obviously this is the site where God punishes the world, and obviously they're living in apocalyptic times. So this would have had huge significance for them in the 7th century, because of the belief that the world was coming to the end. And so, being able to see the Dead Sea from there would have been significant, I would have thought.
Another interesting element is that what's in between the Mount Moriah and Mount Scopus, it is the valley of the Cedron, Nahal Kidron in Hebrew. It's a valley where there is the Cedron River. The Cedron River flows there, and it is described in the Bible as being the valley of decision, or the valley of Jehoshaphat in Joel, for example, also in Zechariah, I think. It is a place where the nations will be gathered for their judgment at the end of times, according to Jewish tradition. So if we look at the very odd mention that we find in the Quran about Safa and Marwa, there is no blame upon him for walking between them. It's a very odd expression. why would there be a blame for walking between two hills? It can make sense in a context of judgment. Imagine this is Judgment Day. Judgment Day is happening. And so you are gathered with the nations between the Mount Scopus and Mount Moriah. And you are walking from Mount Scopus to Mount Moriah to perform the Hajj. And you are being judged by God. So there is no blame. You are among the pure ones. I think it makes sense in this context, whereas it makes absolutely or almost no sense within the Islamic narrative, who has tried to give a sort of Islamic color to this phrase by inventing the story of Hagar and by inventing the Hajj rite in Mecca.
Can I suggest that actually what's going on, if you just go back to that passage that you just moved away from, sorry.
You want to go back to the verse?
Yeah, I was going to refer to that.
Sorry.
No.
Sorry.
No, I've lost it now. Where is the one about you just got away from it? Before you moved away. But there's no blame on them. That bit. I wanted to refer to that.
Yeah, it's the end of verse 158. It's here. There is no blame upon him.
Oh, there. Sorry.
Walking.
Oh, yeah. I couldn't see it there. Sorry. Yeah. I think it could actually mean that they had this concept of, and sorry for the word because people might think I'm going a bit too far here, but a kind of an indulgence received for making the trek from one side. In other words, they would have their sins removed. So on the day of judgment, because they did this special ritual, they will have received like browning points, as it were, from God. And it's one of the traditions of pilgrims is they do build a big pilgrimage in order to get a kind of a reward from God. You know, they get their sins removed or they make up for their sins in some way.
Yeah. Walking, actually, if you look at the text, walking between Mount Scopus and Mount Moriah is equivalent to performing the Hajj. And remember, it means that you have conquered Jerusalem, you have gained access to the Temple Mount, you will access then the Temple Mount, perform the rite there, and the Messiah will descend.
Yeah.
So, it's the biggest indulgence you can get. You are God's soldier. You have done God's work by rebuilding, conquering Jerusalem, rebuilding the temple, and so on. So, yeah, of course, no blame for you.
Yeah. Abdul Malik's nephew was the ruler in Egypt towards the end of the 7th century, and there's a text that exists talking about him inviting someone else in Egypt to go with him on pilgrimage, which makes more sense now if he's just going from Egypt to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage, because I would have thought asking some random person in your government to go on a 1,200 kilometer journey is a bit of an ask, but maybe to go to Jerusalem wouldn't be as big of a deal, you know?
Yeah. Especially more than it makes even more sense when you consider that his associate, his prime minister was Al-Hajjaj, the one who did the pilgrimage to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So my conclusion here is quite simple. Safa and Marwa can also refer to Jerusalem, which seem, I think, evident enough now. The next items are also very simple. I've put them together. It's about the story of Mecca. If you remember when I displayed the list of items, I took this from the Islamic narrative. The Islamic narrative described a city that was ruled by polytheists that forbid the Hajj to true believers, a city from which the believers were expelled. It is the Hijra of Muhammad and his early followers. It is a city that was thereby the objective to reclaim through combat. And this is what eventually happened. The city was taken, peacefully taken, thanks to a treaty, and the true religion, meaning Islam, was established there. And if we look at Jerusalem history in the 7th century, Jerusalem was ruled by Byzantine Christians, so mushrikun, polytheists, and they expelled the Jews from Jerusalem, especially after having retaken it after 678, retaken it from the Persians, and the Jewish pilgrimage was forbidden. Besides, if we look at Surah 48, I've already hinted at it at the beginning of our presentation. We can understand Surah 48 as being a report of a failed attempt by the believer to access the Temple Mount, followed by their expulsion from Jerusalem, an expulsion that is described as happening Bibatni Mecca. Here we have the word Mecca, which is very strange here. It is the only occurrence of the word Mecca, and Bibatni Mecca is translated mostly by sin abiders, translators, as being in the midst of Mecca. Bibatni can mean in the midst, but Mecca it can be understood also as being in the midst of battle, in the midst of anger. So it doesn't specifically refer to the Mecca location, even more so than every other element in the context refer to Jerusalem. It talks about the Masjid al-Haram, for example, the place of the Hajj, and so on. And if we go a little further, Jerusalem, historically speaking, was eventually taken peacefully by the Arabs around 638. So the Arabs ultimately accessed the Temple Mount, and we have many different reports, many different sources detailing how they rebuilt the temple, the third temple in Jerusalem at the time. And so the true religion was established. And we see that here that we have a parallel between the scheme, the grand scheme of the Islamic narrative and actual history. The story of Mecca, according to the Islamic narrative, closely parallels that of Jerusalem. It's a very interesting trait of the Islamic narrative. It parallels the story of Jerusalem in the 7th century.
I mean, they clearly are trying to make Mecca the new Jerusalem, and they're trying to parallel. I mean, a good lie is built on some truth. But
yeah, exactly.
We also have
they developed Mecca. I think Mecca in the Islamic narrative has become much more than Jerusalem was in the original story.
No, they're always
Proto-Islam.
No, they're always
Mecca is now the place of birth for Muhammad. Mecca has become the place of origins for Islam, whereas Jerusalem wasn't the birthplace of any preacher that preached the early believers, and it was not seen as a place of origin for the religion.
Right. But actually, if I may ask something, because those stories obviously not even in the book, and he didn't exist, and the book, by the way, so well done, Odon. All of this is really just speaking about Jerusalem. So, but why did they actually create they have this book already that went around in many different versions, and then they canonized it, but it was talking about Jerusalem. And then for some reason, they took all of those stories, they changed everything, and they said, no, it's this other city in the middle of nowhere. But the thing is, they had already conquered Jerusalem, and why wouldn't they just say, no, that city that mentions here in our book, yeah, we have it. It's our city now. And then we did have a prophet. Oh yes, well, they would invent another story like they have done with everything in their narrative. Like why did they go through the effort of all of that history of Jerusalem, even in their own books, and says, no, it's a different city. It feels like a for no extra benefit when they already rule Jerusalem.
Yeah, I think I can answer it. But first, you have to understand that there is in our reflection about our study of the origins of Islam, there is this first step of the Quranic studies where we understand that it was all about Jerusalem. So because of this, we also understand that there was a second step where they invented Mecca, they fabricated Mecca. So it's very important to secure what we have found. We have found that it was all about Jerusalem, and because of this, it's only in a second step that Mecca was created, and I think it was a gradual process. It was not created as a whole, as the city of Muhammad and so on. I think what triggered it is that Abdul Malik coming to power, because Abdul Malik, we don't know much about him. We have some, but we have some inscription in the Dome of the Rock. Assuming some of them, excuse me, Mel, I know maybe you won't agree, but assuming some of the inscription of the Dome of the Rock, assuming that the inscription we also find on his coins are authentic, I think for his coins, most are authentic, we see that Abdul Malik posits himself as the new leader of all religions, the head of Jews, Christians, and believers. And he put forth the Arabs as being the new people that God has chosen instead of the Jews. So Abdul Malik cannot share his sacred place with the Jew. I think he is the one, or maybe his very successor, who invented the idea that the real place of Abraham was not in Jerusalem, but in Mecca, because it made Abraham a sort of father for the Arabs, and it sort of invalidated the claim of the Jews and of the Christians of having a sort of Abrahamic religion. The one true religion was the one of the Arabs, because they had Abraham's place. And from there, the need to create Mecca, to fabricate Mecca as the place of origin of Islam, developed after Abdul Malik. It developed, I think, when the successors, and especially the Abbasids, felt the need to a renewed legitimacy for their divine power. Abdul Malik was a formidable character, someone who really changed history. Someone like, I don't know, Napoleon or Alexander the Great.
Well,
and because he was so, yeah.
I mean, I just find it odd. I mean, besides a couple of things, then why didn't they change the Quran? Because the Quran says effectively nothing about the Arabs. I mean, again, it goes back to 40 references to Israel and the children of Israel, and the Jews being the children of Israel and being given Israel by Allah over and over. Why didn't they change that in the text? I mean, sure, they wanted to start with a blank slate, so they create a new city and they start a new mythical founding narrative. But why didn't they? Why didn't they remove?
They didn't change it because they could not change it. They changed what they could. They, for example, they edited the satanic part of the satanic verses.
Right. Well, then on that point, back to that then, I mean, we know, we go back, like we could see that Al-Makkah, as the Yemeni Babylonian god, he's already Allah. He was known as Allah, right? The name Allah goes back centuries before Muhammad, and the name Allah is associated with pagan gods, the head of a pagan deity, a pagan pantheon, and Allah has a wife, and Allah has kids, and all of that, and the whole bit, right? And there's in many of these regional locations where they've got Allah under whatever name he's going at the time, but they often call him Allah. He's a moon deity or whatever the case might be. So how do they then take the fact that Allah is a known deity, Allah is known to be part of this pantheon, and now they take this name and they say, okay, well, we're going to roll all of these different gods and whatnots.
They haven't taken the name Allah from a pagan background. I don't think so.
Where did they get it?
No.
Because it's
They
a
got
proper
it
name.
from their religion. They were Christians.
Yeah.
And in Aramaic
that's
Christianity,
Allah.
God is named Allah.
Yeah.
For Christians, God is Allah. And it's
Yeah,
not,
but that's not. But Allah is a proper name. Was if you look at Al-Ilah, that is the
name. Yeah, it has become a proper name due to Islam, but it's not a proper name per se. It has an etymology. It means the God, meaning the one God.
Yeah, but then you find other documents, other scholars will dispute that, and they'll say, no, Allah is a proper name, whereas Al-Ilah would be the God, and that God is Yahweh. The Christians knew Yahweh. So
But explain to me, I would like to have a discussion with the scholars, because how would they explain that there still exist Christian Arabs whose Christianization dates from before Islam, and in their religion, Christianity, they call God Allah or Allah. And
Allah.
there are also Aramaic Christians. They still exist nowadays, even though they are being persecuted. And they still call God Allah.
And that's a title for God, but a proper name for God.
It's not a proper name because it has an etymology. It means the God, the one God.
But the region where Mo came from used the name Allah, and the name Allah referred to these pagan gods and so on. So, I mean, you've got the name already existed, Allah, in that region or all over that region as Allah. So, I mean, why would they pick?
Yeah, maybe it was easier for them to call God Allah when Arabs were Christianized. So starting from the 1st century up until Islam, the one who brought the gospel to them were mostly Aramaic-speaking Christians. So they taught Arabs about God being Allah. And maybe Arabs already had a devotion to pagan deities called Allah or something like this, and it was easier for them to accept that the Christian God was Allah because of this. But it doesn't mean that Allah comes from a pagan God, because there is almost nothing pagan in the literal Quran. We see that the Quran is from a Judeo-Christian background, not from a pagan background. It talks about the Bible, about biblical stuff, and the depiction of God that we find in the Quran comes from Judeo-Christians, Aramaic-speaking Christians, and also Jews, but not from. It has nothing pagan in it.
I think you also have to apply the meaning that they give a word in the 7th century. What meaning they gave to it 1,000 years or 2,000 years before?
It was that name was present quite close historically. I mean, it was present all across, and it was well known at that time.
But the thing is, as Odin has pointed out, Allah, it has been used for centuries by Christians, so it's practically equivalent to Allah. Allah is just the Arabic equivalent to the Syriac.
Yeah, but Allah, as we know, it was in use in that region as well. So, it's just a little bit of an oddity that it's there. And I mean, I just find that the scholarly view is to let's ignore all that stuff. Let's pretend it doesn't exist, and that's the general consensus.
Anyhow, I just want to finish my point on how Mecca became Mecca. We have to look at the big picture of the creation of Islam. Islam in its final form was not needed by the caliphs before, I think, the Abbasids, or maybe some of their predecessors. The Abbasids took power from the Umayyads, so the successors of Abdul Malik. They massacred almost every descendant of Abdul Malik, because they wanted to have absolute divine power over the caliphate, as the Umayyads did. But the Umayyad justification for the divine power of the caliphs was the very particular, very specific nature of Abdul Malik's character, because he was so powerful, because he made such grand claims about his own power as being a divine power, as being a God-given power. His Umayyad successors could sort of claim legitimacy for their power by being the successors of Abdul Malik. But when the Abbasid took over, they could not claim a legitimacy for their caliphate from Abdul Malik's succession, since they had massacred every descendant of him, almost every descendant of him. They were in need of another kind of legitimacy. They needed God to have directly revealed that they were his divine rulers. They were actually the one who needed a prophet and a book and a revelation. And so they also needed a place of origins and circumstances for the revelation. And they were the one who ordered the early layers of tradition to be written. They were the one who invented the title that they were Khalifat Muhammad, as successors of Muhammad. Before the Abbasid, there was no use of the title Khalifat Muhammad. The caliphs were Khalifat Allah, caliphs of God, God's deputies on earth. And this is how Mecca was invented. So at first, Abdul Malik, I think, invented that it was the real place of Abraham, and thereafter his Abbasid successors invented the whole Islamic history. So Muhammad being born there, preaching there, receiving the revelation, and so on. So JC, this is my answer to your question. It's a bit long, but the story is complex, but it's quite easy to understand when you get the big picture.
Thank you, Odon. That actually joins lots of dots that I had, lots of loose ends that I didn't quite understand that. So the book basically is compiled during the Umayyads. The Abbasids then have to create something completely different for them, and that obviously takes hundreds of years.
Can I just throw something in that's kind of might be helpful? The Mysteries of Rav Shimon ben Yohei was written in the 750s. And it basically describes the takeover by rebels from the northeast of Persia, which would be the Khorasan. So it says, let me see, besides him were the warriors of the sons of Kedar, but the northeastern corner of his kingdom will rebel against him, and they will go up against him. 3 great legions of them will fall at the river Tigris and in Persia. He will flee before them, but will be caught and killed, and his sons will be hanged on the tree. So that's the end of the Umayyads. Now, you have to imagine what happens when you have a takeover by the Persians after 100 years of the Umayyads. They don't care about all these Jewish traditions, so they're coming in with a completely different worldview, and they're going to add their mix to the whole thing, and it's going to mess up the entire memory of what happened before. They're going to misunderstand things. They're going to apply different principles to everything, and that's the filter that we're looking through, and that's why maybe it looks like it's more pagan than it was underneath. So the bottom layer, as Odin mentioned, is the Jewish Christian layer, but the it's the Abbasids that add that weird layer on top that makes it all distorted and confused, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that layer has a very strong tie to history. It's not something they just made up on the spot. You can trace all of that to heavily attested, strongly recorded history throughout that region. It didn't come out of their asses. That stuff was the religion, and you can see its parallels directly with Islam.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they didn't completely fabricate the Islamic narrative. They did with a sort of remnant of collective memory, and they used what was at hand. If you look at the narrative of the night journey of Muhammad, so Al-Isra wal-Miraj, it's a sort of Persian legend. If you look at the Arabian tales, for example, there is already here a story of a flying horse. I think the story is titled "The Flying Horse." There were many myths in Persian culture about winged animals.
Ardavira.
This is how they
That's
invented
the
it.
Ardavira. All that, yeah.
Even the burak is a Turkish term.
Yeah, for example,
Yeah.
there is also
actually the burak comes 200 years.
An Ottoman layer.
It's from a poem, actually 200 years after Muhammad first reference to this flying burak. It's actually from a poem ascribed to Abraham. So the story comes 200 years after, and it was originally about Abraham and it got repurposed for Muhammad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I'm almost done with the Jerusalem thesis here. I have just, I think, another slide, and this will be the conclusion. So,
okay,
I think it will be ideal for us to wrap it up now. So let's go to the next item. The next item is a complex one, and I think it will be the last one. It's about Mecca having a shrine that was built by Abraham and Ishmael. This is due to the Islamic reading of the Quran, especially verse 127 of Surah 2, when Abraham was raising the foundation of the house, and within Ishmael, saying, "O Lord, accept this from us. Indeed, you are the hearing, the knowing." And because of this verse, and because of the Islamic understanding of this verse by the one who created the Islamic narrative, they understood that Abraham must have built the Kaaba, the house, because for them the house was the Kaaba. And something more, he was raising the foundation of the house. Actually, the most literal translation of the verse would be is Abraham was raising the house from its foundation, from its existing foundation.
That's
which
removing.
means that there was something before Abraham, and because of this, the traditionists invented that there was a temple there before Abraham. So they invented the story of Adam, the first man, constructing the Kaaba here. This is the only reason why they invented this story of Adam being the first builder. But it's very, if you look at the whole of the passage, I've put first verse 124 up to 127 because it's a whole story there. And it's not about the actual building of the Kaaba by Abraham 4,000 years ago. It's something else, I think. The issue here is the identification of Abraham and Ishmael. Are they the biblical characters, or might there be something more to them? When we look at the verse, Abraham is described as being a leader for the people, not including the wrongdoers. It's here on verse 124. God says, "Indeed, I will make you a leader for the people with a covenant." And Abraham said something about his descendants. It's very strange, actually. Who would have an interest of claiming to be a descendant of Abraham and being among the good descendants, not being a wrongdoers? You see here that the Quran sort of institutes that there are some rightful descendants of Abraham who can claim his legacy and are opposed to wrongdoers. So it's a very convenient text because it institutes a leader for the people. The one who are the rightful descendants of Abraham can claim his leadership for the people. If we look at another verse, it talks about Abraham being commanded by God to purify the house. It's very strange because if we look at the Islamic narrative, Abraham is supposed to build the house. Why would there then be a need to purify the house who is already pure? Because he just built it. It hasn't been desecrated yet. It doesn't need purification. So the question here is, are these verses referring to the biblical Abraham constructing something 4,000 years ago? Or is it a sort of allegory, an image, or an analogy for the one who claimed to be the rightful descendant of Abraham, claiming to be leaders for the people, claiming not to be among the wrongdoers, having the mission to purify the house? The house, we already saw that it mostly refers to the temple in Jerusalem. And there, with these things in mind, let's take a deeper look, a closer look at this strange verse about Abraham building the house. There is something very odd in this verse because it is conjugated in the imperfect tense and not in the past tense. The imperfect tense in Hebrew or in the Arabic, in the Semitic languages, it's the tense of the present and the future. And it strongly contrasts with the preceding verses. The preceding verses are conjugating in the perfect tenses, meaning the past tense. And this one is not. And we have to understand it this way. Then Abraham is not has built, but Abraham raised or will raise the foundation of the house with Ishmael. It's a sort of program here, a commandment given to Abraham to do something in the future. And with the context of the previous verse, the previous verses talked about the purification of the house. It talked about Abraham being a leader for the people. It talked about a sort of covenant being made between Abraham and Ishmael. My question here is maybe Abraham and Ishmael refer to existing characters at the time of the preaching of the Quran. I think the Ishmael is a figure for the Arab believers, and Abraham is a figure for the Jewish inspirers of the Arab believers who view themselves as the leaders for the people. And if we look at it this way, verse 125 take from the standing place of Abraham a place of prayer, and we charge Abraham and Ishmael. Here there is a notion of divine covenant. We, meaning God, urges, he sort of gives a sacred mission to Abraham and Ishmael: purify my house for those who pray in there. And this is the program of what we saw happening in the 7th century. In the 7th century, we saw around 638 a Judeo-Arab alliance conquering Jerusalem and rebuilding the temple there. And this is sort of announced in the Quran. The Quran is a sort of exhortation, a program for the constitution of this Judeo-Arab alliance as being a covenant willed by God, and a program that urges the believers to access the Temple Mount, so to conquer Jerusalem and to rebuild the temple. And with this reading in mind, we could thus conclude that the Quran could describe, a sort of announce or prescribe, even prescribe the conquest of Jerusalem and the building of a third temple. So it's a bit of a complex issue, but it's very interesting, and it makes even more sense when we look at the whole of the Quran, when we look at the whole of our interpretation. When it's talking about the house, it's obvious it's not about the Kaaba, it's about Jerusalem's temple, and so on. And with this in mind, we have almost done our Quranic study about Mecca and Jerusalem in the Quran. And we have established that every Quranic and Islamic narrative description referring to Mecca also refer to Jerusalem. So in a scientific way of putting things is making hypothesis. One hypothesis would be that the Quran describes a city that can be that has the characteristic of both Mecca and Jerusalem. So this hypothesis tells us that in the 7th century there were two cities that shared the exact same features, and it is described in the Quran. It is a very far-fetched hypothesis. And the other hypothesis that we can make is that the Quran is absolutely not about Mecca, but only about Jerusalem. And when you look at the whole of the text, those are the only two hypotheses that one could make. And by comparing the two, I think one is much more probable than the other. Let's put it in this.
I mean, there were other Kaabas and there were other major temple cities. There were other major temples in the region. And I mean, they also went out of their way to destroy them.
There were other Kaabas and so on. But were there other Kaabas in a place that is supposed to be Maqam Ibrahim, with the Masjid al-Haram, with the Bayt?
No, I think those are taken from Jerusalem.
Hajj and Umrah, the direction of prayer, Becca, Safa, Marwa.
No. Odon, I'm not disagreeing that it's Jerusalem. I do not disagree.
That's the thing. If you take every aspect of the problem, it's compelling. I don't
disagree with you at all.
Everyone has to admit it's about Jerusalem and not Mecca. But
they had
this is not the conclusion yet, because if you have been
but also they had to get rid of all of the contradictory evidence. They had to get rid of other evidence that undermined them. So they also had to make moves there, because there were some other things going on that didn't quite sit so well with them, it seems.
I've just taken the Quran into account. I've not looked at other texts and so on. But if you've paid attention to the presentation, you will see that there is one item missing. I have to put it here because I want to be thorough and rigorous. The 15th item was that of Arafat. It's the ultimate item. And it is very, very strange, actually. If you look
Arafat
at everything, but
something.
Yeah, of course.
Assassin, something like that.
Excuse me, I didn't get your point.
Doesn't it, something like assassin? Arafat also means like assassin. Yasser Arafat, killer, assassin.
Yes,
meaning.
Actually, Yasser Arafat. I don't know whether he took the name Arafat or it was his actual family
I mean, he was a
name.
creation of the Russians. I mean, the Russians created him. Russians groomed him, trained him. You know, he's an Egyptian.
But the name was chosen because of the Islamic reading of the Quran. When you read the Quran, there is only one verse with one occurrence of Arafat. So it's an apex in the Quran. And it's a very strange word in Surah 2, verse 198. There is no blame upon you for seeking bounty from your Lord during the Hajj. But when you depart from Arafat, remember God at Al-Mashar al-Haram. I should have added Mashar al-Haram in the descriptions of it's a bit like Masjid al-Haram. It's almost, it points at the same location. So there is something of an Arafat near the Masjid al-Haram. But the Arafat word is very, very strange. It is understood by the translator, such as Murad, as a proper name, as he put it in his translation. Output from Arafat. What does it mean actually? We don't know. I have asked some linguists. I have asked Robert Kerr. I have asked friends who know about Aramaic and so on. The word is very strange. If we change a bit the diacritics on the word, it could mean knowledge or wisdom. But it could then mean if you depart from knowledge and wisdom, so if you go astray from the true religion, but it will be all settled when you get to the Masjid al-Haram in Jerusalem. It could mean that. But here, this is the only thing in the Quran, the only word that I haven't solved the issue. So I put it forth for your audience if you have ideas and proposition. But this is the only thing that I don't know exactly what it is about. But for the rest of it, and the rest is compelling, it's all about Jerusalem. So I think this Arafat word expression must have something to do with the Jerusalem thesis also. But I don't know it yet. And so because of this, I had to have a word about it. And this concludes the presentation for the Jerusalem thesis.
I'd like to share something that actually might confirm what you were saying. If I can, let me just show you this here. So this is let me just see, Jacob of Edessa on the Qibla. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now he says the Jews who live in Egypt, as likewise Magre there, as I saw with my own eyes, and will now set out for you, prayed to the east. Now he's talking about Egypt. So praying to the east would be praying towards Israel, basically, or somewhere in Israel, and still do both people. The Jews towards Jerusalem, and the Magre towards the Kaaba, and those Jews who are in the south of Jerusalem pray to the north, and those in Babylonia pray to the west. And also the Magre who are there pray to the west, say, towards the Kaaba, and those who are in the south of the Kaaba pray to the north, towards the place. So basically, the only distinction is the Magre pray to the Kaaba, which just happens to be the same location as Jerusalem, or at least it seems to imply that.
Could be.
So this is, I'm not sure what the dating of this. I think it's like the latter end of the 7th century.
Yeah, it's the end of the 7th century. Jacob of Edessa.
So according to Robert Kerr, the Kaaba is basically this little temple that was on the Temple Mount. And it, in fact, I think I've shown an image of it. It had pillars and a dome on the top. It's a very small thing. And it existed for a certain length of time. So that would I think support what you've been arguing as well.
Yeah. Well,
There's
I've got a
one
question
thing
here. What is
to-
the source of Jacob of Edessa's transmission?
Or you have to look at the scholars for this. I'm sure Robert Hoyland has written about it in his book, Seeing Islam as Others Saw It. But there's one thing to bear in mind when reading Jacob of Edessa. This is the issue of the date. He speaks about the end of 7th century situation. So it's not the time of the Quran, actually. It's way after the time of the events depicted in the Quran. So it might be that at the time, some Arabs had built a Kaaba somewhere in Arabia. So it would align with Gibson's thesis of Petra. Maybe there was something happening in Petra. They had built a Kaaba there, but it could have been elsewhere. Galès found, Edouard Marie Galès, he found something of a Kaaba in Syria, dating from before Islam. So maybe it was still a place of worship there. If we look at the writings of Anastasius of Sinai, he talks about a place in the desert where the Arabs sacrifice hundreds of camels and cows there. Maybe it could refer to this Kaaba also. But the thing is, with early Islam, there is a sort of fog of war. We don't have a clear picture of everything.
Yeah.
And I don't think we'll get it. But we'll have to rely on whatever solid evidence we have. And I think with the Quran, we have some, it's not much, but it's some solid evidence that at the very beginning, it was all about Jerusalem and not Mecca. And that Mecca is a fabrication, a complete fabrication.
Yeah. Someone asked, well, what do you think? And actually, I'm not sure it was a trick question. Someone trying to deflect to be smart. He said, what do you think about DNA tests proving that Arabs have Semitic DNA? I mean, like duh. I mean, it's like for you're looking at that region, there was lots of interbreeding, there was lots of travel, there was lots of cross-pollination. I mean, and besides, Arabs have been known to invade, rape, and and have sex slaves. So that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. It's not a trick question. In case the guy was trying to go that line, there's no surprise.
There is, I've read some studies on the genetics of the Arab population, showing that most Arabs are most concentrated in Arabia, in the Arabian Peninsula, and we find some Arab genes in Mesopotamia, in the Levant, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Egypt, in Algeria.
I mean, they were trading and traveling in all of these regions.
Yeah, of course.
And trading and traveling. So, it doesn't mean that, oh no, we're Jews now. It just means they're genetic markers. I mean, I think he's also going to probably try and exaggerate the point. That's all.
No, but there's no question here that the Arabs, the original Arabs, before Islam took over, were Semitic people. They spoke a Semitic language.
Yeah. I need to deal with one thing that's a pet peeve. This man says Islamist, Brother Lloyd, not Arabs. I absolutely, positively detest the false, fake term Islamist. This is Westerners, either who are trying to work against the actual Western culture, or these are idiots who think they're smart. But unfortunately, this makes a false separation between jihadis who are Muslims, who are doing Islam, and regular Muslims who are Muslims doing Islam. These are, when you say, no, those are Islamists, it's like they're not Muslims, they're not real. No, those are the 100% factually correct, fully authentic Muslims who are doing exactly what Islam teaches. The only difference between them is not the ones in Islamist, which is a fake Muslim, which is the implication here, which is completely false. It is Azma and Rukhsa in the Sharia. These are strictly following Sharia to the letter, and the rest, well, they're not, because they don't have to. Because as long as a small group follows the Sharia strictly, the rest are absolved from doing so. But if they do not follow Sharia strictly, Allah throws the whole lot of the Muslim Ummah into hell for the sin and the crime, the crime of not performing jihad, which is murdering people. So please get your facts straight, get your terms straight, and can we please just be honest rather than trying to create false confusion over this idiocy. My bad.
Lloyd, if I can add something on the issue. You've read all Sharia manuals and so on. You know about the communal obligation, Fard al-Kifaya.
Fard al-Kifaya, yeah, correct. Yeah.
And actually, even non-Islamist Muslim obey the Sharia. What they have to about jihad?
No, they earn reward. They will reward because.
Let me get my point. If you take the Muslim community, it has an obligation as a whole to wage jihad.
Yes.
So some of them among the community have to carry on with jihad, to wage jihad. And the other, they have an obligation to support them or at least not oppose them. And by not opposing them, which is what they do, they are following the Sharia. So they are Islamists also.
No, they are. They technically, yes, actually, that is very. You're right. They are jihadis. No, they are jihadis because there's 13 or 14 kinds of jihad. I mean, there are major categories, right? Jihad of the mouth, as Bill Warner will say, jihad of the pen, jihad of the sword, jihad of money, right? But there's at least 13 or 14 categories, so they are also getting reward. And as you say, in zakat, whatever charity portion goes to waging war. So yeah, I mean, this term, I don't know why people use this term, but it annoys me. And it tries to make this fake separation between these are all the jihad is the primary doctrine in Islam. Shall we say enforcing the Sharia on the world is the primary doctrine in Islam? That is the Great Commission, and the mechanism is jihad.
Islamically speaking, if you absolutely want to make a distinction between Islamists and Muslims, or Islamists and non-Islamists, the non-Islamists would be those Muslims who don't exist, who physically oppose to jihad. But I haven't seen any.
Yeah, but there's no such word.
Muslim legions fighting against Daesh, for example, or ISIS.
Yeah, sorry, that just annoys me because we're working against ourselves with this kind of idiocy. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. So that's very interesting. I mean, really, a lot of food for thought. Some stuff they're very new as well.
It's a bit dense. I'm sorry for the density and complexity, but the conclusion is very simple. If you take the Quran, which is the oldest source that Islam can claim for Mecca, the Quran is not about Mecca; it's about Jerusalem. So every claim to the authenticity and historicity of Mecca falls apart because of this.
No, agreed.
A simple conclusion.
No, I mean it makes a lot of sense, and it's obviously trying to become the new Jerusalem, and then of course trying to do a one-up on that as well.
Actually, there's two new Jerusalems essentially. Baghdad was called the City of Peace, which is what the original Jerusalem meant. So they had two shots at this. They created Baghdad, and probably later they created another City of Peace, Mecca in the desert. The other thing that we haven't really referred to is the issue of why in the desert. If you look at a lot of the Jewish Baraita, part of the messianic story is that before the Messiah ben David comes, the Jews would go into the desert, and then Elijah would come, and then the Messiah ben David. So probably the location of being in a desert was because of their expectation that this is the ideal location for the Messiah to come. You know,
they wanted to reenact the Exodus. They had to go
Yeah.
into the desert for purification and so on, and then claim the Holy Land by crossing the Jordan River and so on, which is what they did.
Yeah.
There was this battle in 629 at the Muta Passage on the Jordan River, which makes absolutely no sense in the Islamic narrative. In the Islamic narrative, the Arabs were supposed to, the believers were supposed to focus on Mecca, and they wanted to reconquer Mecca.
Yeah.
But instead, we find them 1,000 kilometers from Mecca on the Jordan River, trying to cross into the Holy Land and being defeated by the Byzantines.
Yeah. Can I just read something? You mentioned Baghdad. I just want to find, because I have to transfer it from one computer to another. And there it is. There it is. This is something something we discussed. I'll just show it on the screen quickly as soon as I can bring it up. There we go. Let me share my screen. There we go. There we go. Just something odd. I mean, this is now an anecdote from someone, but this is someone that left a comment, and they said the God in Islam is called Allah. Yet my grandmother would always exclaim Yahoo when I would say or do something extraordinary or outrageous. This is from a talk that we did, I think, some time ago. And when informally referring to God, we would call God El-Il or Ela, okay, which means I in Somali. We would call the sun Korra, which means the neck of Ra, right? Even the country of Djibouti in southern northernmost Somalia is the Egyptian name for Thoth. When someone or something is very extraordinary or very disastrous, we call it Baalayo. In ancient Canaanite, Baal is the title for Lord. Most, if not all, Somalis do not realize the history of these words. Could all these words in the Somali language be remnants of our ancient Cushitic, Canaanite, Kemetic past? I mean, this is just above Ethiopia. So back in the day, you have all of this Southern Arabian influence, all of these gods that were mixed across Africa and Arabia. Before Islam destroyed all knowledge of it, right? Before Islam destroyed all knowledge of it. Edit, I just read that the word Baga means Lord in Sanskrit. In fact, the name Baghdad means Lord given. What is surprising is my mother would exclaim Baga, Baga when astonished or surprised. I never knew what the hell she meant by that, but now I do.
This is what we already talked about. Islam is a soup with many ingredients. There is a historical base and many vegetables and other stuff were added in the soup. In the course of history.
Baghdad is a bit of a confusing one for etymology because there's so many options. I've heard dozens of different parallel etymologies, and
they could all be right. Right? They could all be right. Like from year 1 to year 10, it was this, and then from year 11 to year 20, it was something else, and then they could all be right at some given point. So anyway, just thought I'd show that because this was interesting to me. This was after discussion, and I think I mentioned some stuff about the Semitic origins. I mean, the Egyptian origins, Islam, and all of that nonsense. And we discussed some, and this woman mentioned this, and this is really old guy. Apologies. It's very interesting, that these terms still carry over. So, I mean, there's this carryover from this is 2,000 years ago, and it's still in the language today. And no one knows where it comes from. Or more than 2,000, just 3,000 years ago, some of this. And it's in use today. So, I mean, it's interesting. And it's supposed to be wiped out. It's ancient pagan stuff that's history, but it's in the language right now. It's crazy.
I see what you're trying to do, Lloyd.
Yeah,
I see. You're trying to bring back this Allah thing.
There are questions about, but there's questions about all of the pagan stuff in Islam. And there are things that, look, I mean, one of the papers, Wandsboro, it's not Wandsboro, it could be Wandsboro, but also Jeffrey says, I mean, look, everyone just ignores this. It's there. It's real. It gets ignored. Because, look, whenever I listen to Jay Smith, history started in 572 AD, and not 2 minutes before that, nothing existed. And we have to ignore everything before 572, and only north of Mecca. Nothing else. No, there was nothing to the south. there be dragons. So I'm like, okay, maybe.
Yeah, I think we're dealing with like probabilities, and I think proximate cause carries a higher probability than a distant cause, or whether distance geographically or in time. It doesn't mean that there's no probability. It just means that you have to make a really strong case if it's.
Yeah.
The other thing is linguistics has spread all over the regions, so even that.
Yeah, but if they move
makes
from
it hard.
Jerusalem, I mean, if they move from Jerusalem and settled in Mecca, then they've got this new soup, and they've got to somehow embrace all this new stuff, you know, and incorporate it somehow, integrate it, or get rid of it, you know, whichever comes first. So yeah, guys, I mean, that was great though. Really interesting.
Yeah, very good, Odin. I don't know how you covered so many tonight, but you did a great job.
Yeah.
Can I chime in for a bit?
Consider it my Christmas gift to you and to the audience.
Thank you. And that was really phenomenal, Odon. I think actually what we need is to arrange one session just for Q&As.
No.
Yeah. I'm happy to host, but I'm not available before 27th, maybe 26th, maybe 27th onwards, and then otherwise New Year, you know, January. So next week, no. Yeah. So we call it a day.
In France, we have a saying. We have the trêve des confiseurs. So it's a truce of the candy makers. Between Christmas and New Year's Eve, nothing happens.
Yeah.
It's a truce. It's a truce.
Yeah. So guys, well, thanks for me. I mean, that was brilliant. I mean, Odon, some of it went over my head. There was some of the stuff that was so new and unfamiliar, and but thank you. This was great. And I mean, it's obviously there's definitely strong ties to Mecca, to Jerusalem here. And all I'm going to say is Merry Christmas, everyone. Otherwise, we'll never get off the stream.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Anyone who says Happy Holiday will be hung, drawn, tortured, and displayed on YouTube.
I'll save my questions for the next one.
Okay, then. Okay. Looking forward to it.
All right.
Dr. K.
Actually, it was really great because this was above my, the stuff that I have been studying. But I'm kind of curious, and this would lend more credibility to the Jerusalem thing, is reading the Quran. I noticed that Mecca is supposed to be like the center of Islam, and Muslims, it's, the holiest of holies. But it's only mentioned one time in chapter 111, which is at the end of the book. Now, I'm talking about if we put the Quran in the so-called revelation order, it's at the end of the book, right? And it's only mentioned one time. And then when we look at the Umayyads, which is basically where we actually start finding things, all of these people ruled and lived in Damascus, right? So if Mecca existed, right, and, Muhammad, Abu Bakr, and Umar, and Uthman, and Ali, all these guys ruled from Mecca and Medina, it doesn't make sense that these Umayyad rulers are all up north in Arabia Petraea. And then the early Abbasids, they actually ruled from Baghdad.
And then on top of that, the Egyptians canonize a Quran from Baghdad, from Kufa. A Kufan Quran.
Right.
Why do they canonize a Kufan Quran, not a Meccan or Medinan Quran?
Yeah. Dr. K, you made a very relevant point. Should Mecca have existed according to the Islamic narrative, it should have prospered and thrived with the Arab conquest. And we have absolutely no evidence for Mecca before Islam. But what's even more odd is that we have absolutely no evidence for Mecca after Islam. Meccan trade should have prospered and developed with the first caliphs, for example. We have absolutely no evidence for this. The cities should have thrived, but there is nothing to support this.
Right. One question: why is it that we don't have hardly? It's almost like somebody destroyed all of the evidence from the Umayyad period. I mean, these guys ruled for about 89 years, right? Yeah, we have some coins, we have some inscriptions, we have the inscriptions of Maui on the dam with the cross. But I mean, shouldn't we have tons of writings that have existed? Because it seems that everything that we know about Islam comes much later during the Abbasids from areas that are like distant from Mecca and Medina by
But also, all writings disappear from Arabia for almost 200 years. I mean, someone seems to delete the lot.
Yeah. There's a sort of black hole.
Yeah.
And this is due to the fact that the Abbasids were the one who created Islam and its sacred history. And but the Abbasids were the opponents of the Umayyads. And this was a sort of paradox for them. They had to invent an history in which the Umayyads were depicted as bad Muslims, but not bad enough because they transmitted Islam to the Abbasids. And this created a sort of filter, like you put it, Mel, a filter. We know history, we know the Umayyad history through the Abbasids, but the Abbasids completely distorted the memories of the Umayyads in order to serve their own agenda.
Yeah. Can I just jump in as well? That once they started the process of trying to create a narrative, the good Muslim would come along, and if they see anything that contradicts that narrative, they would, as a good, useful Muslim, destroy it. So there was a self-censorship that went on. If there was inscriptions that might have contradicted a later narrative, they'd have to get rid of it because that could create confusion.
Coins were melted, for example.
Yeah, but the whole region was covered. I mean, you had the Ethiopians who had a written language. You had the South Arabians, the Yemenis with a written language. There was written script all over Arabia, so there's no excuse for it to have suddenly this black hole for 200 years. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that amongst the millions of pages of Syriac text, there's going to be a gold mine discovered. A book that hasn't been read, because an awful lot of it hasn't been read for centuries because there's less Syriac speakers. There's an awful lot of work yet to be done. It'll be, I think something will crop up eventually.
Yeah. Well, they're starting to find in Jordan, I know in the desert, lots of rock inscriptions that are very odd. So, I mean, now they're combing through deserts. And I mean, in Arabia, they destroyed a lot of inscriptions already. So.
Well, I always found Yehuda Nevo's research very interesting about the fact that the Muhammad inscriptions start showing up in the 730s. There's almost nothing to do with Muhammad prior to that. It just came out of nowhere. That's very telling. That's to me like a red flag. It shows that under the Umayyads there's some sort of tradition, but even there it could be just Mahmed and it could be a messianic reference. It's not even the Muhammad of Islam just yet.
But a scholarship, excuse me, advances at a real fast pace. There is still many things to do, Syriac text and so on.
We hope AI can solve some of that problem. If they can learn the script and they can start going through, because AI can do that if the script is uniform.
Yeah. But I just wanted to show you a new initiative that has been that a friend showed me. It's called Oceana, Online Corpus of the Inscription of Ancient North Arabia. Scholars from the Ohio State University. Do you want me to share my screen?
You are sharing it. I'm seeing it.
Okay. They have put together a database of ancient inscriptions. So I'm not very familiar with it yet, but it's. Let me just show you the. Just look at Oceana or Oceana. I don't know how to pronounce it. YouTube channel. there is this video presentation of the database where they have every inscription that they have found on stone. So it's epigraphy, everything. It's amazing. And thanks to this, it's a bit like the Corpus Coranicum initiative. Thanks to this, many independent researchers, such as Mel, for example, or me, will be able to get our hands on very high-end stuff. Very, very interesting. So just to say that things are in motion.
Let me get rid of that.
Let me unshare my screen.
There's another database like that on Arabian inscriptions, especially South Arabian inscriptions as well, where you can see quite a lot of them online and can view them. I've used it in the past. So we were starting to get more data. There's definitely more data coming online. So the tools are getting smarter.
I didn't realize it was muted there, but there's a Finnish scholar called Ilkka Lindstedt
I quoted her before.
He's quite an expert in the inscriptions. I've had a few back and forth with him via email, but he's kind of following on the work that Yehuda Nevo has done. But I think the inscriptions are a great way to go. At least they can rule what's possible, what isn't possible in terms of the history at the time. I think it should be our starting point, Yeah, so I'm going to have to go, guys.
Yeah, so do I. Thank you, Lloyd, a lot for welcoming me. Thank you, guys, for everything. And see you next year. In the meantime, Merry Christmas.
So Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy New Year. If we don't see you, stay safe.
And happy holidays to you, Lloyd.
Merry Christmas, and
I will hunt you down. And I will lock you in the basement for a week. Hold on.
Happy
So
Christian
that term is
holidays.
haram. Okay, there are some things I will make jihad on, and that's one of them.
Okay.
So Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Odin, pleasure. Mel, pleasure. Jason.
Cheers, guys. See you soon. This was great, Odon. Very interesting, and we definitely so excellent to see this happening. Cheers, guys.
Cheers, bye.
Bye.